Hi, my name is Ryan Langwish, and this is Ludo Lodge, a channel about sparking growth in your journey as a game designer. And today I'm going to be reflecting back on the game AlphaNoodles, which my older brother and I recently released for both Android and iOS, and just sharing kind of 5 takeaways or lessons learned from our experience working on this little puzzle game about finding hidden messages in your pasta. There's really kind of 3 reasons I wanted to make this video. The first was just kind of for my own reflection, for me and my brother to kind of look back on the time we spent on this project and think about kind of what have we learned? What are kind of the takeaways that we can bring with us into our next projects? And I think that's kind of just a healthy thing for creatives in general to do, is reflect kind of once creative projects have finished. The second reason is really kind of more the aim of this YouTube channel, which is to help other game designers and just kind of hopefully share this information in a way that is maybe helpful or sparks ideas or ways you could apply things to your own projects. I hope that some of it resonates with others that are, maybe in a similar situation as us, or maybe kind of tangential, but there may be some things that can carry from our experiences to whatever you're working on. And the third reason is really self-promotional, to be honest. We pushed out this game and it's trying to get, more people to look at it. I'm not going to lie and say that's not part of pushing this video out. If I was to give 6 reasons why, or takeaways from working on this, the 6th would probably be, man, is it hard as like an indie hobbyist game developer to get people to play and rate your game. You push it out to however many people, and a small subset of that actually download it, and a very small subset actually rate it. So that is part of this. If you've ever, enjoyed content on this channel, or wanted to say thank you for any of the other tutorial content I've put out, this is an easy way you could do it. You could download AlphaNoodles and give it a rating. We definitely would appreciate it. However, that's not going to be the focus here. We're going to be talking more kind of from the game design perspective and kind of from our perspectives of being the ones creating the game. What are the things that we took away from working on this? So let's jump in by first talking about kind of just context of what AlphaNoodles is, because that'll just be helpful for the rest of kind of this talk. It's a game about finding hidden messages in your pasta, where you can see some screenshots here. These messages are kind of scrambled by the letters on the meatballs being kind of shuffled into different configurations, and it's your job as the player to kind of untangle it and get it back into the solution that will spell out the answer for a given category. But without me going too much into trying to describe it, I think it's just going to be easier to quick play the 30-second trailer. With that, let's jump into the 5 lessons that we learned working on this game. Number 5, and these are not in like a real particular order. They may be kind of weighted towards the last ones being kind of the bigger takeaways, but kind of arbitrary. And number 5 here is allowing unlimited hints. So in the game, and this screenshot kind of shows, there is the opportunity for the player to ask for hints. And if they do that, the game will allow them, if they would like, watch a video ad, and then it'll reveal one of the letters, the position of one of the letters kind of in the sauce. And we knew we wanted that to be part of the game, one, to help people, one, kind of thinking from a monetization strategy of where can we maybe work something like video ads in a way that's, not completely obtrusive. But it kind of raised the question of, okay, how many hints do we let them do? Can they just like keep getting hints until basically the entire solution is spelled out? And I think initially, my phone is going off here. Probably not important. I think initially we felt that, there should be some limit. Do you let them get, once you've done half of the puzzle as hints, like now it's kind of on you to solve it. It just kind of didn't feel right to let them completely solve it without actually doing anything. But we ended up landing on giving them an unlimited hints. And I think really what we kind of realized was, what are we trying to achieve by not letting them have unlimited hints? I mean, is it kind of to just prevent somebody from like not earning their solution to the puzzle? And if so, like, is that really that important? And so we kind of realized, like, by giving unlimited hints, you're kind of letting the player tune their own difficulty. You know, the type of person who kind of thrives on achievement in games, like they want to kind of overcome challenges, and I definitely fall into this category when I'm playing games, they're not going to use the hints. Like, it's against their nature, or they're at least not going to use them, as extensively as we were saying might be an issue. And so it's not really an issue there. But by allowing unlimited hints, we've kind of opened it up to people who maybe the game is just too hard, or they simply would enjoy the game more if they had a little bit more to work off of. And so we've really only broadened the appeal of the game by allowing unlimited hints. And so that's kind of why we landed on that. And realizing that ultimately the goal is a fun experience, not like proving that like, you achieved things in this game. Like, that is a satisfaction that people can get out of games, but it's not like our job as the designer to force that on them as the only way that they can like interact with this game. There's a game that you may be familiar with or not called Celeste, which is pretty popular kind of indie game on Nintendo, Switch, PC, others. Kind of a hardcore platformer type of game. And it's actually one that, hearing some of the designers' thoughts when they were making it, got me thinking more about kind of this concept of accessibility and challenge in games. Celeste is a brutally difficult game, like especially if you play through a lot of like the extended content for it. I mean, it's like gets into like about as hard as you could find in this kind of like platformer style game. But they have this assist mode that basically lets players completely define their own difficulty, to the point where like there's options in assist mode to make the game play at like 50% speed, so you just have way more time to react to everything, or even like make yourself invincible, like nothing kills you, you're just like trying to get through the levels that way. And it allows them to make this game that's really challenging accessible to a lot of people that maybe just aren't looking for that challenge, or they want to experience the game up to a certain point, but like, there's a point beyond where they aren't enjoying it anymore because it's simply too hard. And as I mentioned before, the type of people who really want that challenge aren't going to set the settings in assist mode. So I think it's an interesting thing that I've heard talked more about in games more recently. And I think it's just a good thing to be aware of, like when you're making a game. It's kind of like, especially this is true in video games, kind of how much do you define the difficulty and how much do you maybe give the opportunity for the player to decide where they want that difficulty to be. So that is the first takeaway. Number 4 is about solving from multiple angles. So there's kind of a lot of different classifications of puzzle games. And AlphaNoodles kind of falls into this category where you can kind of approach the puzzle from multiple angles. And what I mean is, when you first are shown an AlphaNoodles puzzle, you could approach it entirely from the linguistic side of just looking at all the letters and being like, do I see an anagram of those letters that fits in the category? And oftentimes, especially on the easier puzzles, that's how you solve it. You're like, hey, I know what the answer is. All I need to do now is like, position it to spell out that answer. But you can also approach it from the spatial approach, because you know the AlphaNoodles solution is going to fall perfectly within the sauce of the puzzle. Nothing's going to be outside of that. And because of that, there's certain kind of spatial logic that you can kind of infer things about the puzzle simply because of how it's arranged spatially. Like, because this, meatball is the anchor that's already in the right spot, there's only certain ways that you can manipulate it to fit in there. And so what this kind of leads to when you're solving the puzzle is you can kind of bounce between these different approaches. So I can be kind of looking at like, okay, how do I anagram these letters into a solution? Maybe I kind of get stuck, and then I go, okay, well, how would these need to go because of how they're connected and need to fit into the sauce? Oh, actually, this has to go this way, or these can't go next to each other because then it wouldn't be able to. Well, now that's new information that I can go back to the linguistic approach and say, okay, well, I know that can't be that way, so that gives me some more information here. And you can kind of keep going back and forth like that. On the linguistic side, you might go, oh, I know a G and a W are very unlikely to be next to each other as far as how the word reads. So it's much more likely that those are going to be, stacked vertically than horizontally. And so it's something that it kind of came organically out of the design. It's not like we really were aware and thinking of this when we were kind of going in, but as we played around with it more, it kind of became evident that this was a big strength of the puzzle. So I think it was kind of, a takeaway that I put in my kind of puzzle design, game designer toolbox is like, okay, there's kind of this, multiple angles thing. And it's specifically in AlphaNoodles, they're kind of different categories of thinking about the puzzle. And it got me thinking about like what other games kind of do something like this. I think like the classic example is crossword puzzles. Because if you think of how you solve a crossword puzzle, you check, do I know what one across is? If I don't know what one across is, what am I going to do? I'm going to start trying to get all those down words, because each down word that I figure out is going to give me a letter that is part of that one across. And now I have more information when I go back and solve there. So it's maybe just kind of interesting to think about if you're ever working on puzzle games, is just like, does your puzzle allow for this kind of thinking? If not, is there a way to maybe introduce it? This might be a good brainstorming ahead of even determining what your puzzle game is, to kind of find something that works this way. But it definitely is something that adds a lot of interest, and it's very satisfying as a player, because every time you get stuck, you kind of have this other way to approach it that hopefully can make a little bit of progress. So now you can come back to where you were stuck, and you can kind of edge forward on both sides, which is just a very satisfying way to solve a puzzle. Number 3, procedurally generated puzzles. So AlphaNoodles includes over 2,000 puzzles, and that is not because we sat and humanly constructed 2,000 puzzles. It's because we built AlphaNoodles to be able to procedurally generate these puzzles using an algorithm, so that we don't have to create the puzzles. So for just some context on how that works, when AlphaNoodles is generating a puzzle, we're giving it a solution of what the actual answer is going to be, and the algorithm is going to generate a grid, or like kind of the area of the sauce that has spaces equal to the number of characters in the answer. And it's going to set all those meatballs in there with the answer. So it's kind of starting in a solved state, but none of the meatballs are connected yet. At this point, it's going to pick one of those randomly to be the anchor meatball. That's the one that is going to stay in the correct position. The user can never move it around. Everything moves relative to that one that they know is in the right position. Once we have that, the algorithm is going to randomly branch out from that anchor meatball, because every meatball needs to be connected back to the anchor so that it's all kind of one tree that can be manipulated. And there can't be any loops there, which is pretty easy algorithmically to achieve, because you just never connect to a meatball that's already connected. And as long as you do that, you'll end up kind of with, once all the meatballs are connected, it'll kind of be this tree. At that point, we shuffle the puzzle, and we have basically ways for it to determine what kind of rotations it can make without like overlapping the puzzle on itself. And it's just going to churn through doing a bunch of manipulations on the puzzle to the point where hopefully, it's very shuffled away from that solution that it began in. And once we have that, we're then going to verify, okay, is this far enough away from the solution? Because with the randomness of shuffling, like, it is possible that you shuffled kind of back to almost what the solution is, which wouldn't make a very good puzzle. So the way we determine, like, is a puzzle shuffled enough, is we look for every meatball relative to its parent, which is just like, what's the meatball that like connects it back to the anchor meatball? It's very funny talking about all this with the theme of meatballs. And we see, is the rotation relative to its parent different than it is in the final solution? So, every meatball has 4 different ways it could be around its parent. If it's in one of the 3 that's different from the answer, then that's kind of like, one in the column of like how shuffled it is. And as long as we have enough of those that are in different rotations, we consider the whole puzzle to be shuffled enough. So that's just kind of some maybe interesting background information on how we approach this. But what this meant is, once we had this system in place, all we had to do to add more puzzles to it was create lists of, the different categories and kind of vet them and make sure they were spelled right and all these things. And then we pretty much knew it was going to work. Like, we just throw it through the algorithm and it works, which is awesome. That said, procedurally generated puzzles is not the approach to take with every game. So when would you want to, procedurally generate it or not? And I think it really boils down to kind of what's the difference, what's the delta between the quality of the puzzle when you procedurally generate it versus if you humanly constructed it. In the case of AlphaNoodles, that delta is like little to none. Like if we have the algorithm scramble it and give us a puzzle, and then you gave me the same solution and said, hey, can you construct a puzzle for this? I'm not going to be able to make a puzzle that's like more effective than what the generation was, just because of the nature of the puzzle. Like it really just needs to all be connected and shuffled, and it's going to be, a solid puzzle. There's not a lot of like human decisions I would make to improve upon that. But that's not true of all puzzle games. There's a lot of puzzle games where, the complexity of the decision space or whatever, there's a lot of different types of puzzle games. You really need that kind of like human touch to design it. Because there's kind of this in between, because the big benefit of procedural generation, as I said here, is it opens up just the volume of puzzles you can have, which especially in like a casual game like this is really helpful, because we can just have kind of unlimited puzzles, or for all practical purposes, practically unlimited. But it's that trade-off, because if that quality delta is different, you choosing to have that volume of procedurally generated puzzles is actually sacrificing the quality of those puzzles. And so you could fall into the trap of like, hey, we can procedurally generate it. And it's like, okay, great. We procedurally generated a bunch of kind of average puzzles. So we're just giving the player a consistently very mediocre experience. And like, well, that's not great. Who cares if you have tons of puzzles if they're not that good? And so there's some games where it's just going to make sense to have more of that human touch. And maybe you have fewer puzzles, but those puzzles are really good and give a really good experience. So I think you just have to kind of understand that when you're making a game like this of, should we procedurally generate or should we handcraft? Ultimately you want that experience to be really good, especially because most players aren't going to play it tons, right? They're going to interact like a lot less with your game than like the power player that, is playing through all 2,000 puzzles. And so if they're only playing through a few, like you want that to be as good as you can, the quality to be as good there as you can, not to mention that quality is going to dictate whether they stick with the game or not. So not always the right answer. In this case, we felt procedural generation was the right answer and really benefited the game, but kind of got me thinking about some of these things, and I thought it was kind of an interesting takeaway. Number 2, and we're getting maybe a little out of the maybe technical or game design and more into just like life as a game designer, and especially like a hobbyist game designer. When my brother and I went into this, we talked about it and it's like, okay, this is a neat idea. It seems pretty simple, pretty like well defined in scope. We could probably churn this out in 6 months. We've been making games together for a long time. Like this could be a nice little quick project. In reality, we finished it 4 years later. And that was, a variety of factors. One is we didn't work on it consistently. As I'm kind of showing here, there's gaps in the arrow. There were just long stretches where we didn't work on it, for whatever reasons or other things going on in life. There also is, growth in scope. Like as you get into it and start doing it, it's like, ooh, it'd be cool if we did this. It'd be cool if we had 15 categories and those categories had tons of puzzles and, we had a hint system and, there's things that you're not thinking about in that first 6-month prediction that come up that you feel are worth adding into the game. Additionally, within those 4 years, early on, I had the opportunity to actually publish a board game design and work with a publisher to get that. Tasty Humans was the game that I worked on. That was something we didn't see coming, but ate up a ton of my time during that stretch. Over the 4 years, we had multiple moves between the two of us. We had multiple children born, multiple job changes. My wife and I did a whole studio renovation project at our new house, which is actually where I'm sitting, is in the new studio workshop that we use for filming. And towards the end of it, my brother and I did a whole rebranding to kind of Bullet Squid as something to put our games under, and started an LLC. And, that was a whole rabbit hole of things we had to do with that. So you just look at like the difference between the expectation and reality here. And I think it's just important to know, especially as a hobbyist game designer, which I suspect a lot of people subscribe to this channel. If you're watching this, there's a good chance you fall in that bucket of you're a hobbyist that doesn't do this full time. It's good to just be realistic about where you're at. And that dictates kind of what projects you choose to take on. We thought this was a small project, and yet 4 years later it's finished. And there's a lot of things, we could have done to do that more quickly, and we feel like maybe for future projects we could be more intentional about. But this is a great data point for us when we're kind of talking about what we should work on. And the reality is I would rather work on smaller projects that we actually finish because we understand what we kind of are capable of doing where our lives are at right now, versus like these aspirational game designs that I'm sure, you probably as the viewer of this can relate to, of just like making the best game you can think of. And it's like, well, if you never finish it, it may just not be realistic that you're going to finish it if you're working a full-time job and you're doing other things and other life things come up. So I think that was a big takeaway, is just like, okay, let's not like pretend we're in a different season of life. Let's not pretend that we're able to approach these projects we're doing together as if we are full-time indie game developers. Let's approach it from the perspective of we work full-time. We both have young kids and other things going on in our life. Like, what can we reasonably do that's going to kind of be enjoyable to work on, that we can get excited about, but it's still like realistic for where we're at right now. Somewhat related to that, number one, the value of collaborating. So this game in particular, my brother and I worked on, we kind of have a unique position of our collaboration together dates back like our entire lives, basically. Because growing up as kids, we worked on little creative projects and game projects together. It was in middle school that we discovered game making software and learned how to program and started making games together all through high school. That's ultimately what put us on the path towards we both now work in software engineering. And so that's kind of a unique position that like we have, 30 years of history to be able to say like, yeah, like we work well together. But I think in recent years, kind of post-college, we had been working on some of our like own projects and hadn't been doing a lot of projects together. And I think we finally just realized like, hey, we both, want to make games and like doing this. Like, we might as well help each other out and work together on these projects. And there's just a lot of benefits to collaborating with someone else. One, it's very energizing to just share the creative process. To be able to get excited about a game with someone who's equally kind of invested in it and bounce ideas off each other. And that energy is really important, especially when we think back to like that previous side of all the things in life that can happen that make it hard to finish a game project. Having someone else to help you keep that energy is just really helpful, not to mention that it, makes the design process more fun. Having more than one person also just leads to good diversity in thinking. I mean, you're not working with a clone of yourself, so you're going to have differences in how you think of things, different skill sets. And, as long as you can figure out how to work well together and kind of have a healthy discussion and be open-minded to like, my idea might not be the best idea, which is something if you're used to working alone, that can be a hard adjustment to not be the one that's calling all the shots, or at least needing to be a lot more open to hearing ideas that are, differ from kind of what you would come up with. But the end results are just better. I mean, it's just the fact of the matter. It's that diversity in thinking. Like, if you can figure out that collaboration piece, you just get better results. Also, the progress doesn't just fall on you to make this game. And I think this especially, is big with working on a video game where it takes a lot of work to make a video game, to be honest. And it's really nice to be able to see, maybe I had a busy couple of weeks with life stuff, but then I look and see, oh, hey, he finished this stuff on the game. Like, progress was made. It didn't halt just because I couldn't work on it. That's very encouraging. It really is, like when you don't have the time to work on this all the time. Very kind of related to that is you get to share the burden of annoying work. Especially with video games, there's a lot of very annoying work. What comes to mind is like really annoying bugs. Things that it's like, they're really stupid, but you have to figure it out, and it's really obscure and like hard to track down, and you end up, spending a ton of time to fix this little thing. It's just it's par for the course with programming. Other things like getting our apps on the App Store. There's a lot of hoops you have to jump through to get onto the app stores and get everything ready and do all these things, or we had to make the video trailer, all these things. Being able to split those between two people is just really nice. You're able to, it feels nice to be like, yeah, that was something I didn't feel like doing, and I didn't have to do it because I wasn't working alone. I could, and we could kind of cover some of these different things split between us. That said, and I mentioned this, my brother and I are a little bit spoiled in that we just have a history that is full of evidence that we know how to work together. We work really well together. And it's just like, that isn't the question here when we're collaborating together. And that isn't going to be the case. If you're looking for like a new collaborator to work with, and it's your first time collaborating with them, there's no guarantee that you're going to really click and, you're going to want to work with them on tons of projects in the future. And so I highly recommend collaborating. I recommend looking for opportunities, whether it's a small scoped project or a game jam or something, to, kind of test the water with collaborating with somebody. But definitely start small if that's still an unknown, because you want to find out, like, is this someone I would want to, work on something bigger with? Definitely don't go and like start a company, an LLC or something with someone that you haven't, don't kind of have that certainty. That said, don't let that scare you away from looking for opportunities to collaborate. Because making games is hard. It's hard and it's it helps to have a collaborator, and it also just, like I said, the results, like you just get better results out of it as well. So that was probably my biggest takeaway, and kind of this game has kind of been the launching pad under our new kind of Bullet Squid branding for us to do some new projects together. And so I think we're both excited for kind of the opportunity of what that could bring for us collaborating. And that's it. Those are my 5 biggest takeaways from working on AlphaNoodles. Thanks for watching. If you made it this far, it probably wasn't a short video. I hope some of it resonated with you, maybe some takeaways. Definitely, if you have any questions about the game, our experiences making the game, or anything else, you can drop them in the comments below, and I'd be happy to answer them. Otherwise, feel free to download AlphaNoodles and give it a try if it sounds like something you might enjoy. You can go to bulletsquid.com/AlphaNoodles for both the links for Android and iOS. But thanks for watching, and until next time, I will see you in the next video.